To the naive person who imagines all the distribution of income is determined by somebody deliberately and actively, it seems that if this is the responsibility of a particular guide, this is evidently done very unjustly. The fact is, it's not being done unjustly because we achieve all that we do achieve by having come to agree to play a sort of game in which the game of the market, as I like to call it, in which, because we are utilizing more information, more facts than anybody knows, the outcome for a particular individual is necessarily unpredictable. Now, an outcome which is unpredictable and undesigned by anybody cannot be just. Just as little as the outcome of a game of chance can be a just game. But people resent this. And the people who imagine, oh, it should be possible to design all this, to arrange this, accept the government to do this in a manner that the distribution is just. Now that is literally impossible because it would require that all this widely dispersed information about particular facts and particular circumstances and particular gifts can be used and controlled by a central authority.
People are saying, poor people can't rise in America anymore. And the data that they use leave out immigrants. Immigrants come here with little more than the clothes on their back. Go in here and by the next generation, their kids are excelling in school, going off to leading colleges and into professions.
I mean, justice is an attribute of individual action. I can be just or unjust towards my fellow man. But the conception of a social justice, to expect from an impersonal process which nobody can control to bring about a just result, is not only a meaningless conception, it's completely impossible. See, everybody talks about social justice, but if you press people to explain to you what they mean by social justice, what they would accept as just, nobody knows. I'm telling you because I've been trying for the past 20 years asking people, what really are your principles of social justice?
The homicide victimization rate among black males in the decade of the 1940s declined by 18%. From 1950 to 1960, it declined another 22%. And then in the 1960s, when all these wonderful new ideas in the criminal justice system came in, all of that reversed, and it shot up 89% in one decade, wiping out all the progress of the two preceding decades. And you could run through a great number of other things. Children raised without two parents present. That was about 22% in 1960. One generation later, it was 67%. And it's gone up a little since then as well. And now the rate among whites is higher than it was among blacks in 1960. Right. So if you look at what actually happens in the wake of these wonderful sounding policies, you see disaster after disaster.
Why couldn't the role of the justice maker come at the end of a process by taking from someone who has more than he needs for the purpose of satisfying somebody who has less than he needs?
Because if he knows that part of his income is going to be taken for him, there's no inducement for him to do that particular thing. If I know that if I do a thing which will fetch a very high price, 2/3 of it are being taken from me, and I can do something much more pleasant for 1/3 of the income without paying any income tax, I'm going to do that and not going to do what's most beneficial to society.
In material terms, there has been some improvement, but that improvement began long before the civil rights laws were passed. From 1940 to 1960. 1940, 87% of black families in the United States were in poverty.
87%.
87. 1960, it's 47. So there's a decline of 40 percentage points in that 20-year period.
In a generation and a half.
Yeah,
say,
and this is before the welfare state comes in under Lyndon Johnson in the form of the war on poverty, the civil rights laws, and so forth. Now, over the next 20 years, from 60 to 80, the rate of poverty among black families goes down an additional 18%, which is fine, but it's the continuation of a pre-existing trend at a slightly lower rate. So it's not, and yet it's credited in the media and even in academia, it's credited usually to the civil rights laws and to the Johnson War on poverty. But of course, this was just a continuation of the previous trend. What really turned bad were the social degeneration that occurred over that period. I could go on for days about the social degeneration, but let me give you just one quick example. When I grew up in Harlem in the 40s and 50s, I never heard a gunshot. Now, I'm sure someone fired a gun somewhere in Harlem, but it was not such a pervasive thing that you had to hear it. You know, I have relatives in Washington. I asked them the same question. People in my generation.
Growing up in Washington, D.C.
Yes, and low-income black neighborhoods. Did you ever hear a gunshot when you were growing up? And the answer was no. I have relatives in North Carolina. I asked the same question. No. And now, you know, people in housing projects especially, they put kids, some of them, to bed in bathtubs so that they won't be hit by stray bullets in the night.
Yeah, it occurs to me that such a thing as social justice becomes almost a contradiction in terms, because if you examine the philosophic roots that produced the modern egalitarian ideal, those roots contain all sorts of departures from the idea that it is possible to establish a difference between right and wrong. They deny the operation of a moral framework and ultimately come to the utilitarian goal that all ideas and all values are to be considered essentially on their own merits. And the same people who have said that and are busy then undercutting the more traditional values in Western civilization are the same people who then go on and prate about social justice as though somehow the assignment of numbers, of quantification, will tell us something about justice, and in fact it will not. So I don't think that you can define social justice. You can define social injustice. You can produce a socially unjust situation, but to do so, what you've really done is undercut individual morality and the opportunity to make those choices that have genuine moral content.
Classical demand is that the state ought to treat all people equally, in spite of the fact that they are very unequal. You can't deduce from this the rule that because people are unequal, you ought to treat them unequally in order to make them equal. And that's what social justice amounts to. It's a demand that the state should treat the different people differently in order to place them in the same position. The rule of equal treatment applies only to things the state has to do in any case. But to making people equal a goal of governmental policy would force government to treat people very unequally indeed.
Incidentally, when they want to help black people, they want to help those black people who are doing something wrong. That is, rioters, ex-convicts, you know, they want to stop the schools from disciplining black kids, males who misbehave in school. I don't hear them concerning themselves about the blacks who are the victims of the people who are doing wrong. One of the classic examples to me of few things that are going very well in the ghettos across the country, and that's some of the charter schools that have come in, where the public schools, the kids are just wiped out. I mean, the kids in those ghetto schools often are 2 or 3 years behind the national norms and all kinds of stuff. But in some of these ghetto schools, especially those run by the KIPP organization or by the Success
charter schools.
I'm sorry, right. Yes, charter schools in the ghetto.
Right.
Their kids are scoring at levels equal to, and in some cases better than, that in affluent suburbs where the kids come from families making $200,000 a year. And you would think, my God, this is something that ought to get a lot of attention. The welfare state supporters are fighting against charter schools. The NAACP is fighting against charter schools. The teachers' unions give a lot of money to politicians. They give money to the NAACP. Moreover, if you have people coming in with charter schools, then you don't have the local political ward heelers, as it were, controlling all these resources that they can use to reward their friends and punish their enemies. And so therefore they want control of the schools, because the schools are a source of jobs. Whether or not the kids learn anything is not their concern. I think it's the most cynical thing you can find in American politics are those people who are making themselves big champions of blacks, and yet who are fighting against the one school, kinds of schools that are offering a way out of poverty for millions of black kids.
Morality is the difference between right and wrong in concrete, specific decisions and transactions between and among individuals. When this is elevated to a social plane, it ceases to have any particular recognizable content as justice.
But is that terminologically subjective? If an individual decides to give succor to a hungry person, why is that different from 10 individuals giving succor to 10 hungry people?
Oh, privately and individually?
No, even if they use the instrumentality of the tribe.
Because at that point I become the sucker for them, because it's my taxes that accompany theirs. It's fine for you to decide to be charitable. It is not fine for you to be charitable with my resources as opposed to yours. In fact, there's no charity connected with them.
Not only do charter schools educate kids from the very same ghetto neighborhoods, in many cases, and I believe in most cases, they educate them in the same buildings.
Oh, really?
Yes, and so you'll have the, like the public school 185, and they're on the first, second floor, and up on the third floor, there'll be the kids from the charter school. Of course, they don't usually build buildings for charter schools. I mean, it's too expensive. And the kids on the first three floors, are scoring down below the 10th percentile. And the kids in the third floor are scoring above the 80th and sometimes 90th percentile. And they're in the very same building. And they were not chosen by skimming the cream. They were chosen by lottery. Some politician said he wanted to sort of ease the pain of people in poverty. And he said, actually, the pain of poverty is what got many people out of poverty.
If you ask people, and have asked people for 84 years since Franklin Roosevelt won the presidency in 1932, more people will answer over a 12-month period. One poll might be different, but over a 12-month period, consistently, the Democratic Party has more people who say they believe and consider themselves part of it than the Republican Party. Republicans can win what I call negative victories when people are upset with the Democrats, but they have never, for one calendar year, even during the height of Reagan and the height of Bush, managed to have a plurality, much less a majority, support among party identification among the broader American electorate. That means what Donald Trump did was use a small faction to take over a smaller party and parlay that into international prominence.